let's start then. First time I saw you was with Mark down on the waterfront, and that was really early days for me in terms of approaching strangers. So you weren't the first, but you were very close to the first people, and obviously got a really nice reception, and that was great. And then probably 6 months after that, so going back maybe 2.5 years, we did the session. I don't know if you remember, that was my very first street portrait session.
Yes.
And such fun. And when I saw you and Mark down at the waterfront, that was the first time I was really conscious of this whole sort of, I don't even know what you would call it, it's sort of personal presentation, person as art, that sort of thing. And so it was almost seeing the person as the canvas.
Oh, that's lovely.
And,
so poetic.
Well, it is, and I see it in other people now, but back then I hadn't recognised it, so it's good. So where did it all start?
Well, I think my mum and my dad, obviously, I mean, that sounds really obvious, but I think my mum and dad both shop in charity shops and always have done, and they both kind of present themselves in a very kind of different way to, I suppose, normal people, and so they always kind of brought me up with the confidence to do the same. I mean, it's not easy obviously in school and stuff when no one is dressing like you, you feel like you don't really belong anywhere, but I think as you get older you develop more confidence because you don't necessarily have to fit into anybody's boxes. So then I started a band, and I started kind of hanging around with people that also dressed a little bit differently, and then I think you just encourage each other, to be honest, like, oh well, you look really different.
So you just ratchet up.
Yeah, and it just levels up and levels up and levels up, which is amazing. I love it. Like, I love hanging out with other people that kind of appreciate it as well, you know. I mean, obviously I've got friends that just wear normal clothes. But I think it's a really fun thing to kind of hang around and be inspired by your friends, basically.
I've got a question about that later on, interestingly. So how do you define what you do?
Well, I would say that I am a vintage business owner and a content creator. I think I've owned my own business for about 5 years. I think it's about 5 years. But in terms of content creation, I am quite new to it, and it is just because I started documenting my outfits and people seem to like them, which is nice. So I create content for Instagram and TikTok as well. I'm trying to be down with the kids on TikTok. And yeah, it's really, really fun. And I think, again, you kind of end up, if you feel a little bit lackluster or anything, you don't necessarily feel as inspired. You can kind of go back and almost be inspired by yourself, if that doesn't sound too egotistical, do you know what I mean? So yeah.
How important is response to you?
Oh, that's such an interesting question, because recently Instagram allowed you to hide your like count, so you have the option for people to see how many likes your posts have got. I started documenting my outfits years and years ago, and I think it's only in the last 2 years that I have had a response, and so I think I would do it anyway, regardless of a response. But I can't say that it's not disappointing when it doesn't get as good a response as something else, or you see someone else doing something similar and you're like, oh, I'm doing that, well, I wonder why they're getting a more of a response. But the thing is, with social media platforms, Instagram in particular, it is it has its own brain, I think, sometimes. So you can't control it. So, if I ever do get a bit disheartened, I just remember why I'm doing it, and I'm doing it for myself, to document my own outfits. So I think response is important. I think it would be naive of me to say that it wasn't. But I think I would do what I do regardless. And then obviously with the vintage business stuff as well, response is a bit more important because you hope that it kind of correlates to sales.
Yeah. Okay. When I was asking about response, I wasn't thinking about social media.
Oh, that's interesting.
And because you're young and you're in business, you jump straight into that. So I'm thinking more in terms of response on the street. Oh,
okay. When I used the toilet before, the girl said, "Wow, you look amazing. Do you normally dress like this?" That's the normal kind of response that I get. People think I'm in a costume, or that I must be, I don't know, in some, like, doing a bet or something like that. And I get that a lot, but I've always had it. I was literally just saying to that girl, she was like, "Oh, you're so brave," and I was like, I'm not brave. Yeah. Because I've always dressed differently, people have always looked at me, and I think I'd rather be notable than not. So I think that's just part of the course, really. That's so interesting that I got straight into social media, isn't it? Straight into the response thing.
So what I notice when I approach strangers, I usually get a really good response, and 3 out of 4 people say yes to photographs, which I'm totally happy with. When I'm walking about, sometimes I'll see someone, and for whatever reason I don't approach them because I'm going for coffee, or I need the loo, or the light's going, or whatever. And they almost look disappointed. They're almost anticipating an approach. That's the way it feels. Now, would that sort of fit in with yourself, or not? You dress
I think it's the same as you, really. I think if I'm doing something and I need to be somewhere, or I'm meeting someone, then I probably would kind of earphones in, sunglasses on, head down sort of thing. Like, I need to just be somewhere. But yeah, I think maybe if I'm just kind of like wandering about with a friend or with Mark or what have you, I think maybe that I'd be a
just
bit
do
like,
the star thing.
Yeah. I do get it quite a lot.
Camera
also,
this way.
I think it is. I think you've mentioned this before, but I think sometimes it can feel like people are taking the mickey when they take a photo of you. I have had people take my photo without asking me, and that does bother me when people take your photo without asking you, because I just think it's not very polite, really. But also 9 times out of 10 it's because they're taking a picture of you to send to their friend or whatever, to be like,
look what I've seen.
Look at this ridiculous thing that I've seen. And that's not very nice, because that's kind of being objectified in like the wrong way, I suppose.
Okay, right, enjoyed that one. Talk a little bit about the business side of things. So you've had a joy, a pleasure, a lifestyle that's led into something.
Yes.
So just talk about how that happened.
So, as I said, I've had my business for about 5 years, and it started out with me just having too many clothes and needing to sell them. And then because I had kind of a bit of a following, people would always ask me where my clothes were from anyway, and I thought there must be kind of a way of making this into something. And I think when I was younger, I always went into these vintage shops and just was like, wow, this is like the dream job. And I worked in some vintage shops as well when I was at university, and that was really fun, and kind of got to see the behind the scenes of like how it works on a larger scale. So I kind of unknowingly did quite a lot of research. And I think if something in your life brings you joy, you should do everything that you can to make that your life, basically.
So has vintage exploded, or have I just become more conscious of it?
That's such an interesting question, because I would say it's always been there. But I don't know whether that's because I've always sought it out. So for example, on Bold Street, there used to be Little Red vintage. This is about 2004, I'm going to say. There was Little Red vintage. Practical Magic had Above the Egg. They had a little vintage shop there. There was Pop Boutique, but not where it is now. There was Oxfam, which is obviously still there. And then there was a lot more shops, like physical shops, than there are now, I think. But I think with kind of sustainable fashion, that's exploded. That's become a huge thing. People are much more aware of that, and so I think people there's more people looking for vintage, but perhaps less shops, maybe like physical shops. I think there's Instagram as well has allowed a lot of people, and things like ASOS Marketplace and Depop and those kind of apps and websites and things. They've opened up having a vintage shop to people that like don't have to immediately register on Company's House and like do all of the business things. They can just start selling some things, and then it can grow naturally. So I think you've got a lot of shops that are kind of opened up because of that. But yeah, I think vintage has always been there for the people that have sort it out.
Yeah.
But now there's almost true vintage, which is kind of up to 60s.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of retro, which is like 70s and 80s. And then you've got a lot of shops now selling 90s and noughties stuff, which is horrible, but personal opinion.
But it's almost compulsory now.
I know. It's been 30 years since the 90s, so I suppose that does make it vintage now. I definitely thought 80s things were vintage in the noughties, so that would make sense, because that was only 20 years old.
I did a session with a lady a couple of weeks ago, and she was dressed in vintage.
Oh yeah.
Looked fab. From the 50s.
Wow.
So sort of 50s to now is, well, if you go back that far from the 50s, you're into Victorian times.
Oh my God, yeah.
So just amazing, really.
Yeah.
And, so it was a delight to do it, and enjoyed it. Right. What's Mark's role in all of this?
So he still has a full-time job, but the ultimate goal is to have us both working full-time on the business. I kind of do more of the creative marketing side of things, whereas he does more of the business side of things, although I am getting my head around that slowly but surely. But yeah, things like our tax return and boring things like that. But he's also just an amazing support as well. For everything that I do, but I think particularly with the Octopus Garden, it's very much our baby. He's amazing at finding suppliers. He's very, very solution focused, and I have a tendency when there's a problem to kind of go, at least temporarily. I panic, and then I think, oh my God. And he's very solutions focused, so he would sit down and calmly figure out the solution to the problem. So I don't know what I'd do without him.
I was thinking more in terms of the sort of the companion side of things, a companion to a lady who dresses.
Yeah.
So what's his style?
I think being with Mark has definitely opened up even more.
Really?
It's almost like, as I said, hanging out with people who you kind of level up with.
Yeah.
I think Mark is like that also. Mark has two styles, and in the day when he's kind of just working or like maybe seeing friends or what have you, he dresses a little bit more like 80s, so we'll dress in kind of like fun t-shirts and like dungarees and stuff like that. And then if we're going out or we're going for dinner or what have you, he's very 60s. He's really into the 60s as a general thing. He would be mortified if I said he dressed 80s. Right. He loves the 60s, and he's introduced me to a lot of 60s music as well, which I didn't know before I met him, so I think that's opened up more doors for inspiration and things like that. And I think because he does look a little bit different as well, when we go out together, it kind of just feels like, well, everyone's looking at us anyway, so, whatever.
Double up.
Exactly. So he's definitely given me more confidence, but it's interesting because I think as a man, I think if you are a bit more different, I don't think it's as well received from what I've understood from Mark's experience. He's had some terrible experiences with like dressing a bit more flamboyantly, so I think it's put him off a little bit, which is so sad.
Toned him down
so
a little
sad.
bit,
but I think going out with me, I think it has given him a little bit more confidence, which is nice.
I see you going into Rennie's occasionally.
Yes.
So does that suggest another sort of creative direction?
I really enjoy art as a general thing. My teacher told me I wasn't very good in school, so I didn't do it for a long time.
Mr. or Mrs. Motivator.
Yeah, I know exactly how to put kids off things. But I love drawing, and my mum is like a hobbyist. Like, she knows how to do loads of things and always wants to try and do more things. So she always encourages me to kind of do the same thing, and she bought me a screen printing set for not last Christmas, I think it was Christmas before, and so she it came with quite a lot of things, but you needed some extra bits, so I've tried that, and then we are trading at festivals with the business this summer, so I need kind of art odd little crafty bits. And the reason I go into Rennie's is because it's an independent, isn't it? So it's a lovely kind of thing to support. And I've never been in there and not got what I wanted, which is nice.
Which is good.
Yeah, but things like Dowling, unless you want to drive to B&Q, that would be the only place I would think to go, that you can kind of get to public transport to, really.
so that's dabbling, really. You're
It's dabbling.
Lots of other things.
I think, you need a lot of like signage, and I like, when I see things that are quite expensive, I like to have a go at making them.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's a good thing. You end up spending more money most of the time when you try and make the
Until you
thing.
get it right, and then you move on to something else.
Exactly, then you're bored.
Okay, right, that was nice. Okay. I want to talk about the mental process of what you do. And just an example of my daughter, when she started work, she would go to work looking a bit different, making an effort, but it was, and people sort of, the comments were really positive, but for her it was torture, but wondering what to wear, what fit goes with such and such. Now, so what's your process then? Is it anything goes, or is it wild child?
Yeah, I think it depends what I'm doing that day, and unfortunately, you do have to wear some practical things, which is annoying.
Yeah.
But this is so weird, but thinking about what I'm going to wear the next day helps me get to sleep.
Right.
Because I have such a... I often don't get to the end result before I drift off.
Yeah.
But I have such a busy brain. Like the other day, have you seen this? There's a new programme on Channel 4 called something to do with cookbooks, like Cookbook Challenge or something.
No.
It's fascinating if you like food. And I thought of 3 cookbook ideas before I went to sleep the other day, and it's just sometimes I just wish I could turn my brain off, and that's a way that I do that. So that is part of the process. And I think when I needed to be somewhere every day at a certain time, that was a little bit harder, and I wore a lot of like just quite not as interesting things because it was too much to have to think about every single day, and sometimes you just need to get out, and also especially in the winter, by the time when you leave the house it's dark, and by the time you get back it's dark as well, so it kind of feels like, oh god, like you don't even have a chance to kind of capture it or anything like that. So I think I did used to wear quite a lot more practical things, but yeah, it's just fun. It's really fun. It's a really good creative outlet for me, and I think if I had to wear, for example, I did a gardening project. You saw me after one of the sessions I did. It was a gardening project in Kensington Fields,
right?
And I did not look anywhere near as like done,
right.
And that was torture for me because I had to wear comfortable, practical things that I didn't mind getting dirty every day. And I hated it. So I think it brings me joy to put things together and to present myself in a certain way. And so I think if I didn't have that, it would just make me feel really sad.
Okay, so work on the basis that art is an expression of a thought, a belief, a feeling, an emotion, in one of the creative sort of media. So what are you expressing when you do what you do?
Oh my gosh, that's a really big question. I think it's nostalgia. I think nostalgia is a big part of it.
Yeah.
Not my personal nostalgia, but the love of nostalgia
Yeah.
as a whole thing. And I think like the general attitude. I don't think I mean that, because I think there's a tendency to believe that everybody in the 60s and 70s was like, hey man, cool, peace and love, but it wasn't actually like that.
Or working in factories.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen Carry On at Your Convenience.
Yeah.
So I don't think it was necessarily like that, but I think that's probably part of the vibe, the energy, I suppose, as well. And I think, as I kind of said before, I'm a strong believer in like, if something brings you joy in life, that's what you should try and make your life about, really. And I think most of the time, I saw a really good quote, and unfortunately I'll have to paraphrase it, but it was something to do with the fact that you find a lot of privileged people are artists. They have got a lot of privilege because they don't need to necessarily pay the bills. They don't need like a proper job, whatever. And doesn't that show you that if everybody had no like financial pressures and responsibilities, eventually it would lead them to art of some kind. So like music, or like I even think there's a lot of science that's kind of like art, isn't it? You know, like a lot of engineering is quite arty, and like I like to see everything has a kind of arty twist to it. And so yeah, it's kind of just joy, and like a lot of people have said that, you know, my outfits, because they're so colourful, it does genuinely make them happy, which is amazing. So yeah, I'm not sure really. That's a kind of roundabout way of saying, I think, the kind of peace and love version of the 60s and 70s, but bringing that into now, and kind of making it more about what brings you joy every day.
Good stuff. You touched on something earlier about having friends that sort of make it ratchet up, so they get more and more sort of extreme or sort of heightened. Is there a collective scene around what you do? Yeah, definitely. Because I think there's so many people who love the similar thing, especially in Liverpool because of its history and like the Beatles and the music scene and stuff like that. I think I would say that there's 3 kind of scenes that I'm personally a part of. I think there's a Liverpool scene, there's like a creative scene, there's a lot of like musicians and stuff, and I think I was part of that more so. Leave that one for a minute, because I'm coming on to that.
Oh, so okay, great. So there's that, and then there is like a vintage community on Instagram, and that's just loads and loads of people that just love particularly 60s and 70s. I imagine there's other kind of communities for other decades and things, but there's definitely one for that. And then also I have a lot of friends that also do kind of content creation and influencer work as well, because that is it's like the Wild West. No one knows what to charge, because it's such a new kind of industry, if you like. No one really knows what they're charging, or what's fair and what's not fair, and what kind of things you should be aiming for. And
is this you created content for other people?
Yes, for brands and things like that. Yeah. Okay. So and that just becomes a bit like, it's quite overwhelming. So it's really good to have other people that do a similar thing, so that you can touch on them and say, how much would you, I've been asked to do this, how much would you charge for that? Because it ends up being a bit like the brand is like, well, what do you want to charge? And I'm like, well, what's your budget? And then it's so difficult to kind of negotiate. And I think every artist has that at some point in their lives, don't they? So yeah, I think those are the kind of 3 communities I'm on, really, which is lovely.
Okay, go back to the Liverpool thing, which is, I think, the last question. Yeah. Part of the reason for this sort of series of conversation is to establish whether Liverpool itself impacts on creativity. Now, I don't mind if it does or it doesn't, I'm just asking the question. So, is there something about Liverpool, the city itself, being in a Liverpool community as such, that impacts on you, what you do, how you do it?
Yes, in short. I think that if you try hard enough, and like, it is difficult, I think, when you feel on the periphery of a scene or of a community or what have you, it can feel very difficult, because in every kind of community it can be cliquey, and there can be it can feel quite difficult to become a part of it in the first instance. So I think you'll agree with this. I worked in Lush before I worked in the Students' Union. That is a wonderful, like, melting pot of people who are just so creative, and they work in Lush, but they all of them also do something else. And it's always a creative thing, and like that for me was absolutely amazing, for like opening up so many doors to people that I wouldn't have known otherwise. Mark has lots of creative friends as well, so he introduced me to a lot of amazing people. And then when I was in a band as well, I was in a band for 4 years, and it was it's hard, because being in a band is hard, but it was so easy because there's so many other people who want to support you, they want to play with you, they want to do fun things. Just there's so many people trying to do cool things, and once you know those people, it feels like the possibilities are just endless, because these people are just like so creative, and they just want to do all these weird and wonderful, amazing things. So I think yes. And also I know quite a lot of people that have come from other places in the country, or the world to Liverpool because of its kind of scene and because of its history and its energy and things. And I think that they haven't been disappointed, which is good.
That's it then. So thanks for doing the talk or the conversation. It's always a joy to see you.
It's lovely to see you too.
And when you were arriving, I said to you that I saw you from 150 yards.
Yeah.
And that's about right, I think. It was,
Oh, okay. I was going to say I'll aim for 200 next time.
Well, aspire.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Howard.